In the glittering world of billionaires where love is a currency and loyalty a fragile commodity, a pregnant wife's dream of motherhood is shattered in a heartbeat. Isabella, carrying the heir to a vast fortune, believes she had it all: a doting husband, a life of unimaginable luxury, and a future filled with joy. But a single deliberate push from her husband's mistress sends her world spiraling into a nightmare. The baby is gone, and the man she loves. He dismisses it as a mere accident. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a saga of a woman's fight for the truth, a truth her powerful husband will do anything to bury. Isabella de la Torre. A name that once graced the pages of art history textbooks, now found her own life resembling a masterpiece, or so she thought. At 28, she was the wife of Julian Croft, the 35-year-old titan of the tech world, a man whose net worth fluctuated with the stock market, but always remained in the realm of the stratosphere. Theirs was a love story that had captivated the media, the brilliant art curator who had captured the heart of the elusive billionaire. Their penthouse apartment, a glass-walled marvel overlooking Central Park, was a testament to their seemingly perfect life. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the carefully curated collection of modern art that Isabella had lovingly assembled. A Rothko here, a Pollock there, each piece a silent witness to their whirlwind romance and subsequent marriage. They were the golden couple, their every move chronicled by gossip columns and glossy magazines. Isabella was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a boy they had already named Leo. Her pregnancy had been a blissful journey, a time of nesting and quiet joy amidst the opulence. Julian, for his part, had been the epitome of a doting husband. He would fly in exotic fruits from across the globe to satisfy her cravings, commission lullabies from renowned composers, and fill their home with the intoxicating scent of her favorite flowers, white peonies. "Only the best for my queen and my prince," he would whisper, his hand resting possessively on her burgeoning belly. Isabella would melt into his embrace, her heart swelling with a love so profound it felt almost sacred. She had never known such happiness, such security. But beneath the shimmering surface of their idyllic life, a dark undercurrent was beginning to stir. It started subtly, a series of late-night meetings that stretched into the early hours of the morning, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume clinging to his clothes when he finally came home. When Isabella questioned him, Julian would laugh it off, his charming smile disarming her concerns. "Just business, my love. A new acquisition. You know how it is?" And she did. Or at least she thought she did. She had always admired his ambition, his drive. It was part of what had drawn her to him. So she pushed her doubts aside, attributing them to the hormonal roller coaster of pregnancy. The first time she saw her, it was at a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The woman was a vision of statuesque beauty poured into a crimson gown that seemed to defy gravity. Her name was Victoria Vance, a rising star in the competitive world of venture capitalism. She moved with a predatory grace, her laughter a little too loud, her eyes a little too possessive as they followed Julian around the room. Isabella felt a prickle of unease, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She watched as Julian leaned in to whisper something in Victoria's ear, their heads close together in a conspiratorial huddle. For a fleeting moment, the mask of the devoted husband slipped, revealing a flicker of something else, something illicit. Later that evening, as they were being chauffeured home in their sleek black Bentley, Isabella broached the subject, her voice carefully neutral. "Victoria Vance seems very familiar with you." Julian didn't miss a beat. "She's a colleague, Isabella. A brilliant mind. We're working on a big project together. You're overthinking things." He reached for her hand, his touch cool and dismissive. "It's the pregnancy hormones, darling. They're making you paranoid." Paranoid. The words stung, a sharp, unexpected jab. But Julian was so convincing, so reassuring, that she allowed herself to be lulled back into a state of placid contentment. After all, what did she have to complain about? She was living a life that most people could only dream of, married to a man who professed to adore her. She was being silly, she told herself. insecure. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they began to germinate in the fertile ground of her solitude. Julian's late nights became more frequent, his excuses more elaborate. The scent of Victoria's perfume, a heady blend of oud and something cloyingly sweet, seemed to linger in the air long after he was gone. One afternoon, while searching for a misplaced earring in Julian's study, Isabella stumbled upon a small velvet box tucked away in the back of his desk drawer. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was a diamond necklace, a cascade of glittering stones that must have been worth a fortune. But it wasn't the price that made her gasp. It was the inscription on the back of the clasp, to V, forever and always. J. The air rushed out of Isabella's lungs. V. Victoria. Forever and always. The words were a cruel mockery of the vows he had spoken to her on their wedding day. The truth, stark and undeniable, hit her with the force of a physical blow. Julian was having an affair. The gilded cage she had so willingly inhabited suddenly felt cold and suffocating. The priceless art on the walls seemed to mock her, their vibrant colors, a stark contrast to the grayscale reality of her life. The baby in her womb, their son, felt like a fragile link to a man who was living a lie. That night, when Julian came home, Isabella confronted him. The diamond necklace lay on the coffee table between them, a glittering symbol of his betrayal. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken accusations, with the weight of a shattered marriage. "What is this, Julian?" she asked, her voice trembling but firm. He looked at the necklace, then at her, his expression a carefully crafted mask of confusion. "It's a gift. For you. A surprise." The lie was so audacious, so blatant, that Isabella could only stare at him in stunned disbelief. "For me," with an inscription to V. For the first time since she had known him, Julian looked flustered. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "It's a mistake. A misunderstanding." But Isabella was no longer the naive, trusting woman he had married. The scales had fallen from her eyes, and she saw him for what he truly was, a man who was willing to say anything, do anything to protect his carefully constructed world of lies. The argument that followed was a storm of raw emotion, a torrent of accusations and denials that echoed through the vast, empty spaces of their penthouse. Isabella's voice, raw with pain and betrayal, rose to a fever pitch. "How could you, Julian? With our son on the way, how could you do this to us?" He had the audacity to look wounded, to play the victim. "I love you, Isabella. You're my wife. This thing with Victoria, it means nothing. Nothing," she shrieked, the sound a ragged tear in the fabric of their once perfect life. "You bought her a diamond necklace and told her, 'Forever and always.' Is that what you call nothing?" The fight raged on, a brutal, ugly war of words that left them both exhausted and emotionally drained. In the end, there was no resolution, only a cold, hard stalemate. Julian retreated to his study, the door closing with a soft, final click that seemed to signify the end of an era. Isabella was left alone in the cavernous living room, the city lights twinkling mockingly outside the window. The days that followed were a blur of numb disbelief. Isabella moved through her life like a ghost, the vibrant colors of her world muted and gray. The baby's kicks, which had once brought her such joy, now felt like a painful reminder of her husband's betrayal. She knew she should leave him. She had the means, the resources. Her family, though not as wealthy as Julian's, was well off and would have welcomed her back with open arms. But the thought of raising her son alone, of depriving him of a father, was a prospect she couldn't bear to face. And a small, foolish part of her still clung to the hope that Julian would come to his senses, that he would choose her, that he would choose their family. It was a hope that would prove to be her undoing. The discovery of Julian's affair was a crack in the foundation of Isabella's world, a fissure that widened with each passing day. The air in their penthouse, once filled with the easy laughter and loving whispers, was now thick with a cloying tension. Julian's attempts at reconciliation were half-hearted and transparent, his words of love and remorse ringing hollow in Isabella's ears. He was a man going through the motions, a puppeteer pulling the strings of a relationship that had lost its heart. Isabella, for her part, retreated into a cocoon of quiet sorrow. She spent her days in the nursery she had so lovingly decorated, a serene oasis of pale blues and creams. She would sit for hours in the rocking chair, her hand resting on her belly, whispering promises to her unborn son. She would protect him. She would love him fiercely. She would be enough for him, even if his father wasn't. But the serpent had already entered her garden, and its presence was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Victoria Vance, no longer a shadowy figure in the periphery, began to insinuate herself into their lives with a chilling audacity. She would call Julian's phone at all hours, her voice a sultry purr on the other end of the line. She would send him work-related emails that were filled with thinly veiled innuendos and private jokes. One afternoon, Isabella was arranging a bouquet of flowers in the living room when the doorman announced that a Miss Vance was on her way up. Isabella's blood ran cold. She hadn't been expecting any visitors, and the thought of coming face to face with her husband's mistress in her own home sent a wave of nausea through her. When the elevator doors opened, Victoria stepped out, a vision of corporate chic in a tailored pantsuit that hugged her curves in all the right places. She carried a sleek leather briefcase and an air of entitlement that was as offensive as it was intimidating. "Isabella," she said, her voice smooth as silk, her lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope I'm not intruding. Julian and I had a lunch meeting, and he asked me to drop off these documents for him." She held out a folder, her manicured nails a bloody slash against the white of the paper. Isabella took it, her hand trembling slightly. The documents were a flimsy pretext, a transparent excuse to invade her sanctuary, to mark her territory. Victoria's eyes scanned the apartment, a flicker of something akin to contempt in their depths. "What a lovely home," she said, her tone laced with a condescending sweetness. "So domestic." The implication was clear. Isabella was the dowdy pregnant wife, a relic of a bygone era, while Victoria was the modern, powerful woman who truly understood a man like Julian. Isabella, though shaken, refused to be cowed. She drew herself up to her full height, her hand instinctively going to her belly, a protective gesture that was both maternal and defiant. "What do you want?" "Victoria?" she asked, her voice low and steady. Victoria's smile widened, a predatory baring of teeth. "I just wanted to see for myself what I'm up against." She took a step closer, her eyes dropping to Isabella's swollen abdomen. "A baby. How quaint. Do you really think that's enough to hold a man like Julian?" The audacity of the woman was breathtaking. "Julian is my husband," Isabella said, her voice laced with an icy fury. "And this is my home. I think you should leave." Victoria laughed, a short, sharp sound that grated on Isabella's nerves. "Oh, I'll leave, for now. But don't get too comfortable, darling. Julian has a notoriously short attention span, and I'm much more entertaining." With a final lingering glance that was both a threat and a promise, Victoria turned and walked away, her heels clicking a triumphant rhythm on the marble floor. The encounter left Isabella shaken to the core. Victoria was not just a passing fling, a momentary lapse in judgment on Julian's part. She was a rival, a predator, who was actively trying to dismantle her life. That evening, Isabella confronted Julian about Victoria's visit. He feigned ignorance, his eyes wide and innocent. "She came here, I had no idea. She must have misunderstood something I said." But Isabella was no longer buying his lies. "She threatened me, Julian. In our home. She's trying to drive a wedge between us." Julian sighed, a long-suffering sound that was meant to convey his weariness with her melodrama. You're being hysterical, Isabella. Victoria is a business associate. You're blowing this all out of proportion. The gaslighting was relentless, a constant chipping away at her sanity. He made her feel as if she were the one who was crazy, the one who was irrational. He was so good at it, so convincing, that there were moments when she almost believed him. But then she would remember the look in Victoria's eyes, the cold, calculating ambition that lurked beneath the polished veneer. And she would know that she was not crazy. She was in danger. A few weeks later, Julian announced that he was hosting a small, intimate gathering at their Hamptons estate. A weekend getaway for a few of his closest business partners and their spouses. Isabella's heart sank. She knew with a sickening certainty that Victoria would be there. "I don't want her there, Julian," she said, her voice pleading. "Don't be ridiculous, Isabella," he scoffed. "She's a key player in my new venture. It would be a professional slight not to invite her." "And what about the personal slight to your pregnant wife?" she retorted, her voice rising with a desperate frustration. "You're being emotional," he said, his tone dismissive. "It's just for a weekend. I expect you to be a gracious hostess." And so, Isabella found herself trapped, forced to play the role of the perfect wife, while her husband's mistress paraded her victory in front of her. The Hamptons estate was a sprawling, Gatsby-esque mansion that sat on a pristine stretch of private beach. It had once been Isabella's favorite place in the world, a sanctuary where she and Julian could escape the pressures of the city. Now it felt like a stage for her own personal humiliation. As she had expected, Victoria was there, her presence a dark cloud on the otherwise perfect summer day. She was staying in one of the guest cottages, a charming ivy-covered building that was just a little too close to the main house for comfort. Throughout the weekend, Isabella was forced to endure a constant barrage of subtle taunts and thinly veiled insults. Victoria would accidentally refer to an inside joke she shared with Julian or innocently ask Isabella if she needed help with something, her tone implying that her pregnancy had rendered her incompetent. The other guests, a coterie of sycophants and social climbers, either didn't notice or chose to ignore the drama unfolding before them. They were too busy enjoying Julian's lavish hospitality, too eager to curry favor with the billionaire, to concern themselves with the feelings of his pregnant wife. Isabella felt utterly alone, a solitary island in a sea of smiling faces. She sought refuge in the quiet corners of the estate, in the rose garden that she had so meticulously planned, in the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. One afternoon she was walking along the beach, the gentle lapping of the waves a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. She saw Julian and Victoria in the distance, standing close together on the pier. He was laughing, his head thrown back in a gesture of carefree abandon that she hadn't seen in months. And then he leaned in and kissed her, a long, lingering kiss that was filled with a passion he no longer showed to his wife. The sight was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left Isabella breathless with pain. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. She had known, of course, that they were lovers, but to see it with her own eyes, to witness the depth of his betrayal, was a fresh and agonizing wound. She turned and fled, her bare feet sinking into the soft sand as she ran back to the house. She didn't stop until she reached the sanctuary of their bedroom. She locked the door behind her, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. That night at dinner, Isabella was a ghost at the table. She picked at her food, her eyes downcast, her silence a stark contrast to the lively chatter around her. Julian, oblivious to her pain, played the role of the charming host, his laughter echoing in the cavernous dining room. After dinner, as the guests mingled on the terrace, sipping champagne and enjoying the cool ocean breeze, Isabella excused herself. She couldn't bear to be in the same room as Julian and Victoria a moment longer. She went to the nursery, the room she had so lovingly prepared for her son. She ran her hand over the smooth, cool wood of the crib, her heart aching with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "I will protect you," she whispered to her unborn child. "I will not let them hurt you." But even as she spoke the words, a sense of foreboding washed over her. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, a game with rules that were constantly changing. And she had a terrible feeling that she was about to be sacrificed. Later that evening, as she was getting ready for bed, Isabella overheard a hushed conversation in the hallway. It was Julian and Victoria, their voices low and urgent. "You have to be more careful," Julian was saying. "She's already suspicious." "Let her be suspicious," Victoria purred. "What's she going to do? She's weak. She's dependent on you." "Don't underestimate her," Julian warned. "She's smarter than you think." "Oh, please," Victoria scoffed. "She's a sentimental fool, and once the baby is born, you'll be tied to her forever. You need to end it, Julian, now, before it's too late." There was a long pause, and then Julian's voice, cold and decisive. "I know. I will." Isabella's blood ran cold. He was going to leave her. After all his promises, all his lies, he was going to discard her like a piece of trash. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The floorboards beneath her feet felt unsteady, the air in the room thick and suffocating. She stumbled back, her hand reaching for the wall to steady herself. She had to get away. She had to escape this house of lies, this gilded cage that had become her prison. She packed a small bag, her hands trembling so hard she could barely grasp the zipper. She would go to her family, to people who loved her, who would protect her. She crept down the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was quiet. The guests had all retired for the night. She was almost at the door when a voice stopped her. "Going somewhere, Isabella?" It was Victoria. She was standing at the bottom of the staircase, a triumphant smile on her face. "Get out of my way," Isabella said, her voice a low growl. "I don't think so," Victoria said, her smile widening. "Julian and I have some unfinished business to discuss, and you, my dear, are in the way." She took a step forward, her eyes glittering with a malicious glee. And then she did the unthinkable. She pushed her. It wasn't a hard push, not a violent shove. It was a small, deliberate movement, a calculated act of cruelty. But it was enough. Isabella, caught off guard, lost her balance. She stumbled backward, her arms flailing wildly as she tried to regain her footing. But it was too late. Her heel caught on the edge of the top step, and she went tumbling down the long, winding staircase. The world dissolved into a blur of pain and darkness. The last thing she heard before she lost consciousness was Victoria's triumphant laughter. Isabella's world returned to her in fragments. The sterile smell of antiseptic, the muted beeping of machines, the dull throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from the very core of her being. She blinked open her eyes to a world of white. White walls, white sheets, white light filtering through the blinds of a hospital window. A figure stirred beside her, and she turned her head, a wince of pain shooting through her neck. It was Julian. He was sitting in a chair by her bedside, his head in his hands. He looked haggard, his usually immaculate suit rumpled, his hair disheveled. He looked up as she moved, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot, meeting hers. "Isabella," he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Relief, guilt. It was impossible to tell. He reached for her hand, his touch sending a jolt of revulsion through her. She pulled her hand away, the movement a Herculean effort. The memories of the previous night came flooding back, a torrent of pain and betrayal. Victoria's triumphant smile, the deliberate push, the horrifying tumble into darkness. "The baby," she whispered, her voice a raw, croaking sound. Her free hand went instinctively to her stomach. It was flat. The gentle, reassuring curve that had been her constant companion for the past 7 months was gone. A cold, hollow emptiness had taken its place. Julian's face crumpled, and for a moment Isabella saw a flicker of genuine grief in his eyes. "The doctors. They did everything they could," he stammered, his voice breaking. There was too much trauma. "I'm so sorry, Isabella. Our son, he's gone." The words were a death knell, a final brutal blow to her already shattered heart. A sob tore through her, a raw, animalistic sound of pure agony. The pain was a physical thing, a gaping wound in her soul that was far more excruciating than any of her physical injuries. Her son, her Leo, the tiny life she had nurtured and protected, the baby she had loved, with a fierceness that had surprised even herself. Gone. snatched away by a cruel twist of fate, by the malicious act of a woman who had seen him as nothing more than an obstacle. Through the haze of her grief, a new emotion began to bubble to the surface. A cold, hard rage. "Victoria," she hissed, her voice venomous. "She pushed me." Julian's eyes widened, and he shook his head, a look of panicked denial on his face. "No, Isabella, no. You're confused. You fell. It was an accident." "It was not an accident," she cried, her voice rising with a desperate fury. "She was there. She pushed me. I saw her." "You're hysterical," he said, his voice taking on a soothing, placating tone that set her teeth on edge. "The doctors said you have a concussion. Your memory is unreliable right now. The gaslighting, even now, even in the face of this unspeakable tragedy." He was trying to twist her reality to make her doubt her own mind. "I know what I saw, Julian," she insisted, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. "She did this. She killed our son." He sighed, a long, weary sound, as if her accusations were a tiresome burden. "Isabella, please. Don't do this. Don't turn this tragedy into something it's not. It was a terrible, terrible accident. That's all." And then the full, horrifying truth of her situation dawned on her. He was protecting her. He was choosing his mistress over his wife, over the memory of their dead child. He was willing to let a murderer go free to save his own skin, to protect his precious affair. The realization was a fresh wave of agony, a betrayal so profound it threatened to drown her. The man she had loved, the man she had married, the father of her child, was a monster. "Get out," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Isabella, get out," she screamed, the sound raw and ragged. "Get out of my sight. I never want to see you again." He recoiled as if she had struck him a flicker of something. Surprise hurt in his eyes. He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over her bed. I'll come back later," he said, his voice hesitant. "When you're feeling calmer." He turned and walked out of the room, the door closing with a soft final click. And Isabella was left alone with her grief, with the hollow emptiness in her womb, with the chilling realization that she was married to a man who had not only betrayed her, but had also become an accomplice to the murder of their child. The days that followed were a blur of pain and despair. Isabella's physical injuries, a broken arm, a concussion, a myriad of cuts and bruises, were nothing compared to the gaping wound in her soul. She refused to see anyone, not her parents who had flown in from California, not her friends who sent a constant stream of flowers and well wishes. She wanted to be alone, to drown in the silent, suffocating depths of her grief. The hospital staff treated her with a gentle, pitying kindness that she found almost unbearable. They saw her as a tragic figure, a wealthy wife who had suffered a terrible loss. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that she was a victim of a crime that her own husband was trying to cover up. A week after the accident, a detective came to her room to take her statement. He was a kind, tired-looking man with gentle eyes and a patient demeanor. Isabella, her voice flat and emotionless, told him everything. She told him about Julian's affair, about Victoria's threats, about the confrontation on the staircase. She told him with a chilling certainty that Victoria Vance had pushed her. The detective listened patiently, taking copious notes, but Isabella could see the doubt in his eyes. She was a grieving mother, a woman who had suffered a severe head injury. Her testimony was unreliable. "Mr. Croft has already given his statement," the detective said, his voice carefully neutral. "He said he was in his study when he heard you fall. He said Ms. Vance was in her guest cottage at the time. He's lying." Isabella said, her voice a low, desperate plea. "He's protecting her. We'll look into it." "Mrs. Croft," the detective said, his tone professional but non-committal. "We'll interview Ms. Vance, of course. But without any other witnesses, without any physical evidence." He let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. It was her word against theirs. a grieving, hysterical woman against a powerful billionaire and his equally influential mistress. After the detective left, Isabella felt a despair so profound it was almost paralyzing. She was trapped. The system, the law, the very people who were supposed to protect her were all stacked against her. Julian's money, his power, his influence, they were an impenetrable fortress, a wall that she could never hope to breach. That evening her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation to Victoria, a fact that brought Isabella a small, grim sense of relief, came to visit her. Eleanor had been the one to handle her prenuptial agreement, a document that now seemed like a relic from another lifetime. "I've spoken with Julian's lawyer," Eleanor said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "He's offering a very generous settlement. The penthouse, the Hamptons estate, a significant portion of his assets. All he wants in return is a quiet divorce. No fuss, no scandal." "He wants to buy my silence," Isabella said, her voice flat. "Essentially, yes," Eleanor confirmed. "He wants this to go away. He wants to move on with his life. With Victoria." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. "And what about my son?" Isabella asked, her voice breaking. "What about justice for Leo?" Eleanor's expression softened, a flicker of genuine sympathy in her sharp eyes. "Isabella, the police are treating this as an accident. Without any new evidence, it's unlikely that will change. Your word against theirs is not enough to bring a criminal case. So I'm just supposed to take his money and walk away?" Isabella asked, her voice rising with a desperate incredulity. "I'm supposed to let them get away with murder? I'm not saying it's fair." Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm saying it's the reality of your situation. You're up against a very powerful man, a man who will stop at nothing to protect himself and his interests." Eleanor's words were a cold, hard dose of reality, but they did not extinguish the fire that was burning in Isabella's soul. They fueled it. She would not be silenced. She would not be bought. She would not let them erase the memory of her son. She looked at Eleanor, her eyes once so full of love and life, now hard and resolute. "I'm not signing anything," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm not taking his money. I'm going to fight him. I'm going to find a way to prove what they did. If it's the last thing I do, I will get justice for my son." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment, a flicker of something akin to admiration in her eyes. "It will be a long and difficult road," she warned. "I know," Isabella said. "But I'm ready." The grieving wife was gone. In her place was a woman with nothing left to lose, a woman fueled by a mother's rage and a burning desire for justice. The game had just begun. And Isabella della Torre was no longer a pawn. She was a queen, and she was about to start a war. The sterile white walls of the hospital room became Isabella's war room. The rhythmic beeping of the machines, once a mournful soundtrack to her grief, now became the metronome for her burgeoning resolve. Julian's generous settlement offer was not just an attempt to buy her silence. It was an insult to the memory of her son. It was blood money, and she would sooner burn in hell than accept a single cent of it. Her parents, David and Sofia della Torre, flew in from their sun-drenched vineyard in Napa Valley. They were a study in contrast to the cold, calculating world Isabella now inhabited. Her father, a man with hands weathered by soil and sun, possessed a quiet strength that anchored her. Her mother, whose artistic spirit had been Isabella's first inspiration, enveloped her in a fierce, unconditional love that was a balm to her wounded soul. They didn't press her for details. They simply sat with her, their presence a silent testament of their support. They saw the change in her, the hardening of her gaze, the steel in her spine. The fragile, art-loving girl they had raised was gone, replaced by a woman forged in the crucible of betrayal and loss. "Whatever you need, mija," her father said, his voice a low rumble. "We are with you." It was the permission she didn't know she needed. With her family as her bulwark, Isabella began to plan. Eleanor Vance. Her lawyer became her most trusted general. She was a shrewd, pragmatic woman who understood the labyrinthine world of the super-rich, a world where justice was often a commodity to be bought and sold. "Julian's greatest strength is his money," Eleanor said, her fingers steepled as she sat across from Isabella's hospital bed. But it's also his greatest weakness. He's insulated arrogant. He believes he's untouchable. We need to find the cracks in his armor. Their first move was to refuse the settlement. The rejection sent a clear message to Julian this was not going to be a quiet, clean affair. Isabella's refusal was met with a swift and brutal response. Julian, through his army of lawyers, filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional instability on Isabella's part. The narrative was clear: he was the long-suffering husband and she was the hysterical, grieving wife who was lashing out in her pain. The media, once so enamored with their fairy tale romance, now feasted on the carcass of their marriage. The headlines were sensational. The articles filled with anonymous sources who painted Isabella as a fragile, paranoid woman who had become unhinged by her tragic loss. Victoria Vance was portrayed as a supportive friend who was helping Julian through this difficult time. Isabella read the articles with a cold, detached fury. It was a masterclass in public relations, a carefully orchestrated campaign to discredit her before she could even speak her truth. They're trying to control the narrative, Eleanor said, her voice grim. We need to fight back. But how? Isabella's word, the word of a hysterical woman, was not enough. They needed evidence. They needed a witness. They needed to find someone who was willing to testify against a man as powerful as Julian Croft. And so the investigation began. Eleanor hired a private investigator, a former NYPD detective named Frank Miller. He was a gruff, cynical man with a network of contacts that reached into the darkest corners of the city. Rich guys like Croft, they think they're invincible, Miller said, his voice a gravelly rasp. But they all have secrets, and secrets have a way of getting out. Miller started digging into Julian's life, into his business dealings, into his relationship with Victoria. He was looking for leverage, for anything that could be used to put pressure on Julian to force him to tell the truth. Meanwhile, Isabella focused on her own recovery. She threw herself into physical therapy, pushing her body to its limits. Her physical pain a welcome distraction from the emotional agony that was her constant companion. She started a journal, a place to pour out her grief, her rage, her memories of her son. She wrote to Leo every day, telling him about her fight for justice, promising him that his life, though brief, would not be in vain. One day a package arrived at the hospital. It was a small, unassuming box with no return address. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a burner phone. A text message appeared on the screen as soon as she turned it on. He's not who you think he is. Be careful. The message was anonymous, untraceable, but it sent a chill down Isabella's spine. Someone else knew. Someone else was watching. The anonymous message was a sliver of hope in the vast darkness of her despair. It was also a stark reminder of the danger she was in. She was not just fighting for justice. She was fighting for her life. A few weeks later, Isabella was discharged from the hospital. Her parents wanted her to come back to Napa with them to heal in the familiar comfort of her childhood home. But Isabella refused. She was not running away. She was staying in New York, in the belly of the beast. She moved into a small, discreet apartment in a different part of the city, a place where she could be anonymous, a place where she could plan her next move without the prying eyes of the media. The penthouse, once her gilded cage, was now a painful reminder of a life that had been stolen from her. Frank Miller's investigation began to yield results. He discovered a pattern of shady business dealings, of backroom deals, and corporate espionage. Julian was not just a brilliant tech titan. He was a ruthless businessman who was not afraid to get his hands dirty. He also uncovered a string of past relationships of women who had been discarded when they no longer served a purpose. They all told a similar story of a charming, seductive man who had swept them off their feet, only to reveal a cold, manipulative side when they tried to get too close. But the most damning piece of information came from an unlikely source. A disgruntled former employee of Victoria Vance's venture capital firm. The man who had been fired for questioning Victoria's ethics contacted Miller with a story to tell. He said that Victoria was not just Julian's mistress. She was his business partner in a series of highly illegal schemes. They were using her firm to launder money to funnel funds into shell corporations to evade taxes on a massive scale. "She's obsessed with him," the former employee said. "But it's not just about love, it's about power. They're a toxic combination, the two of them. They feed off each other's ambition." He also told Miller something that made Isabella's blood run cold. He said that Victoria had been furious when she found out about Isabella's pregnancy. She saw the baby as a threat, he said. A threat to her position, to her future with Julian. She said she would do anything to get rid of it. It was the corroboration they needed, the proof that Victoria had a motive. But it was still hearsay. They needed something more, something concrete. The answer came in the form of another anonymous text message on the burner phone. The Hamptons estate. The library. Behind the bookshelf. A safe. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. The library. It was her favorite room in the house, a place she had designed herself. She knew every inch of it, every book, every shelf. But she didn't know about a safe. It was a long shot, a wild goose chase. But it was the only lead they had. Getting into the Hamptons estate would be difficult. Julian had a state-of-the-art security system, a team of guards who patrolled the grounds 24/7. But Isabella knew the estate better than anyone. She knew its weaknesses, its blind spots. And she had a key. She and Eleanor devised a plan. It was risky, dangerous. But Isabella was done playing it safe. One moonless night, dressed in black, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Isabella slipped onto the grounds of the Hamptons estate. She moved through the darkness like a ghost, her knowledge of the terrain her only guide. She disabled the security system using a code she had created herself, a code that Julian in his arrogance had never bothered to change. She slipped into the house through a side door, her footsteps silent on the cold marble floor. The house was eerily quiet, a mausoleum of memories. She made her way to the library, the room bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the windows. She went to the bookshelf, her fingers tracing the spines of the familiar books. She pushed, she prodded, she searched for a hidden latch, a secret button. And then she found it. A small, almost invisible indentation in the wood. She pressed it, and a section of the bookshelf swung open, revealing a small black safe. Her heart leaped. The anonymous tip was real. But the safe was locked. She had no idea what the combination was. She tried Julian's birthday, their anniversary, a series of numbers that had once held meaning for them. Nothing. Despair began to set in. She had come so far only to be thwarted by a locked door. And then she remembered. Leo. The name they had chosen for their son. The due date they had been so eagerly anticipating. With trembling fingers, she entered the numbers. A soft click echoed in the silent room. The safe was open. Inside there was a single leather-bound journal. Julian's private journal. Her hands shook as she opened it. The pages were filled with his familiar, elegant handwriting. She began to read, and the world fell away. The journal was a chronicle of his affair with Victoria, a detailed account of their clandestine meetings, their secret getaways, their shared ambition. But it was more than just a record of his infidelity. It was a window into his soul, a glimpse into the mind of a man she had never truly known. He wrote of his boredom with his life, with his marriage. He described Isabella as a beautiful but simple woman, a trophy wife who was no longer a match for his intellect, his ambition. The words were a fresh wave of pain, a cruel twisting of the knife that was already embedded in her heart. But as she read on, her pain turned to a cold, hard fury. He wrote about the pregnancy, about his resentment at being trapped by a child he had never wanted. And then she found it. The entry from the night of the accident. "Victoria is right," he had written. "The baby is a complication, a loose end. It has to be dealt with. She has a plan. A bit theatrical for my taste, but it will be effective. A tragic accident, a grieving wife. No one will ever suspect a thing. And then we will be free." The words were a confession, a cold, calculated admission of guilt. He had known. He had planned it. He had been a willing participant in the murder of his own son. Isabella's world tilted on its axis. The man she had loved, the man she had mourned, was a monster of unimaginable cruelty. She took the journal, her hands trembling with a rage so profound it threatened to consume her. This was it. This was the proof she needed. This was the weapon that would bring him down. She slipped out of the house as silently as she had entered, the journal clutched to her chest like a sacred relic. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was an avenging angel. And she was about to unleash a storm of biblical proportions on Julian Croft and Victoria Vance. The game was over. The war had just begun. The discovery of Julian's journal was the turning point. It was the Rosetta Stone of his deception, the master key that unlocked the truth. In Isabella's apartment, the book lay open, its elegant script a chilling testament to a monstrous soul. When she presented it to Eleanor and Frank Miller, the gravity of the find was palpable. "It's a confession," Eleanor stated, her voice tight with a mixture of disgust and legal fervor. "He was so arrogant he never imagined you'd find it, but we can't just throw it at him. We have to be strategic." Their plan was ruthless and precise: dismantle Julian's empire before going for the kill. They would isolate him, shred his reputation, and attack his fortune, ensuring that by the time they confronted him, he would have nowhere left to run. The assault began immediately. Frank Miller, using his network, leaked damning information about Victoria Vance's financial dealings to the press. Simultaneously, Eleanor filed a multi-million-dollar wrongful death lawsuit against both Julian and Victoria, a public declaration of war that hinted at explosive evidence yet to be revealed. The 1-2 punch of financial scandal and a wrongful death suit created a media firestorm. As Julian's PR machine scrambled, Isabella seized the narrative. She gave a single powerful television interview, her grief-stricken face now a portrait of quiet, steely resolve. Looking directly into the camera, she delivered a devastating blow. "My son's life was not a complication," she said, her voice steady, using Julian's own cruel word from the journal. "His life mattered. And I will not rest until the people responsible for his death are held accountable." The interview was a turning point. Public opinion, once swayed by Julian's power, now saw him as a villain, and Isabella as a courageous mother fighting for justice. The immense pressure began to fracture the alliance between Julian and Victoria. Cornered and paranoid, they turned on each other, their once unbreakable bond dissolving into a mess of blame and recrimination. But Isabella knew she needed more than a journal and public sympathy. She needed a human witness. The final piece of the puzzle came to her while looking at old photographs. In the background of her wedding was a kind, familiar face, Maria, their former housekeeper. Maria had left their employ abruptly after the fall, given a generous severance by Julian to ensure her silence. Frank Miller tracked her down to a small town upstate. Isabella went to see her alone, finding Maria living a quiet life haunted by the secret she kept. At first the woman was terrified, but Isabella didn't threaten her. She simply told her story and spoke of Leo, the son she had lost. The genuine grief and determination in Isabella's voice broke through Maria's fear. With tears streaming down her face, Maria's guilt came pouring out. "I saw it," she whispered, her body trembling. "I was in the kitchen. I saw Ms. Vance wait for you on the stairs. I saw her push you." The confession grew even more damning. The next day I heard Mr. Croft on the phone with her. He was so angry. He shouted, "You were supposed to make it look like an accident, not a murder scene." It was everything. An eyewitness to the push and an ear witness to the conspiracy. Maria's sworn testimony would corroborate the journal's cold, calculated words. Isabella now possessed an arsenal of irrefutable evidence. The time for maneuvering was over. The final act was about to begin. The final act unfolded not in a courtroom, but in the glass-walled penthouse where Isabella's world had been shattered. It was framed as a deposition for the wrongful death suit, but in reality, It was a meticulously planned ambush. Isabella, flanked by Eleanor and Frank Miller, sat opposite Julian and a stone-faced Victoria Vance, each backed by a team of expensive lawyers. The air was thick with unspoken venom. Eleanor began without preamble, her questions methodically chipping away at Julian's composure. After establishing the affair, she played her first card. "Mr. Croft," she announced coolly, "I'd like to call a witness." The door opened and Maria, the former housekeeper, walked in, her face pale but resolute. Julian and Victoria froze, their shared expression of horror a silent admission of guilt. In a trembling but clear voice, Maria recounted the events on the staircase, her testimony unwavering. "I saw Ms. Vance push her," she stated before delivering the fatal blow. "The next day I heard Mr. Croft on the phone with her. He shouted, 'You were supposed to make it look like an accident, not a murder scene.'" The room was deathly silent. Julian's lawyers were stunned, their defense strategies vaporized. Before they could recover, Eleanor delivered the killing blow. She placed Julian's leather-bound journal on the polished table. "And then there's this," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "A private journal detailing your plan to deal with the complication of your unborn son." Julian stared at the book, his face ashen. The sight of his own words, his secret confession, broke him. The last vestiges of his control shattered, and he turned on Victoria, his voice a venomous shriek. "This is your fault, you and your reckless plan. You pushed her, cornered, and betrayed." Victoria lashed out like a cornered animal. "Me!" she screamed, all icy composure gone. "You were the one who wanted him gone. You signed his death warrant when you called him a complication." Their ugly confessions tumbled out, a frantic torrent of blame and shared guilt. As they tore each other apart, Frank Miller quietly made a phone call. Moments later, the penthouse elevator opened to reveal two detectives, Julian Croft. Victoria Vance, the lead detective, announced, his voice booming in the sudden silence, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The sharp, definitive click of handcuffs was the final note in Isabella's symphony of justice. As they were led away, Julian's terrified eyes met Isabella's. She watched him, her expression a mask of cold, quiet victory. She had lost more than anyone could imagine, but she had fought back and won. In the silence of her former home, surrounded by the ghosts of her past, she was finally free. The fall of a millionaire, the jailing of a mistress, and the quiet triumph of a mother's love. Isabella's journey from a gilded cage of lies to a life of purpose is a testament to the indomitable strength of the human spirit. She proved that no amount of money or power can bury the truth forever. She fought for her son, for his memory, and in doing so, she found her own salvation. This was more than just a story of revenge. It was a fight for justice, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, a single voice fueled by love and conviction can roar louder than an army of lies. What did you think of Isabella's incredible fight? Let us know in the comments below. The champagne was flowing. The laughter was deafening, but it all came to a sickening halt with a single tap on a microphone. Liam Sterling, a man whose net worth was eclipsed only by his ego, stood before 100 of their closest friends and business partners. He raised a glass not to his beautiful 5 months pregnant wife Clara, but to her public execution. With a smile that never reached his eyes, he announced their divorce. By sunrise, the glittering life Clara knew was gone, and she was a refugee, her only sanctuary, the one place she never expected, the doorstep of the woman whose son had just destroyed her. The air in the Sterling mansion hummed with the electric current of manufactured joy. It was a symphony of clinking crystal, a murmur of expensive pleasantries, and the ghost of $1,000 an hour jazz trio weaving through the opulent rooms. The house itself was a monument to modern wealth, a stark statement of glass and steel perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. From the infinity pool that bled into the horizon to the curated art that hung on the walls, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there, everything was designed to impress, to intimidate, to declare that Liam Sterling was not just a man, but an empire. Clara Sterling, swathed in a bespoke Valentino gown of deep sapphire silk that draped elegantly over the gentle swell of her pregnancy, moved through the throng like a phantom hostess. She was the other masterpiece in Liam's collection. Her smile was practiced, her laughter a delicate chime, her hand a cool, steady presence on the arm of a senator or the back of a tech CEO. She was beautiful, poised, and perfectly curated to be the wife of a man like Liam. Tonight was the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, a night where Liam played the benevolent philanthropist, writing checks with a flourish that made the city's elite applaud his generosity. For Clara, it was just another performance. For 5 years she had played this role. She had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of high society, to differentiate between a genuine smile and a baring of teeth. She had learned to ignore the subtle condescension in the eyes of women who saw her as little more than a trophy, a beautiful woman from a good but not wealthy family who had won the ultimate prize. Their love story, as Liam liked to tell it, was a fairy tale. The brilliant, self-made billionaire sweeping the charming art history graduate off her feet. He had showered her with a life she couldn't have imagined: private jets to Paris for brunch, front row seats at Milan Fashion Week, a black Amex card with no conceivable limit. In return, she gave him her grace, her quiet intelligence, and a veneer of class that his new money desperately craved. And soon she would give him an heir. But the gilded cage, no matter how spacious, was still a cage. The fairy tale had long since revealed its darker chapters. Liam's affection was conditional, his praise a tool for manipulation. He was a man of immense charm and chilling coldness, often in the same breath. He praised her impeccable taste when she decorated their home, but would fly into a quiet, terrifying rage if she moved a single object without his permission. He called her his queen in public, but in private he chipped away at her confidence with a sculptor's precision, isolating her from her old friends and making her entirely dependent on his world. Darling, Liam's voice, smooth as single malt scotch, cut through her thoughts. He appeared at her side, his hand landing on the small of her back. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was an act of possession. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a Tom Ford suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his eyes the color of a stormy sea. "You look breathtaking, the perfect Madonna." The compliment, with its thinly veiled reference to her pregnancy, sent a familiar chill down her spine. To Liam, this baby wasn't a product of love. It was the ultimate acquisition. The Sterling heir. The continuation of his legacy. "Thank you, Liam," she murmured, forcing a smile. "It's a wonderful party. The foundation will be very pleased." "The foundation is me," he said, his smile tightening. "Don't forget that." He leaned in his voice, a low whisper against her ear. "Did you speak to Mr. Dubois about the museum wing?" "Yes," she said, her own voice barely audible. He was non-committal. He said the board was still considering other patrons. Liam's fingers tightened on her back, a painful pinch hidden by the fabric of her gown. "Non-committal is not the answer I wanted. I've pledged $10 million. See to it that he becomes committed. You're good at that. Charming people." Before she could respond, he had turned away, his public persona slipping back into place as he greeted a new arrival with a booming laugh. Clara took a steadying breath, her hand instinctively going to her belly. She felt a faint flutter, a tiny reassuring kick. "It's you and me, little one," she thought, a wave of fierce, protective love washing over her. "It will all be worth it for you." She surveyed the room. The faces were a blur of familiar power players. The Athertons, whose family had practically built the city. The formidable Jessica Vance, a hedge fund manager who could make or break companies with a single phone call. They were all here orbiting her husband, the brilliant sun, at the center of this glittering, ruthless universe. They were all witnesses, though they didn't know it yet, to the final brutal act of her marriage. She caught sight of her reflection in the vast floor-to-ceiling window. A woman in a sapphire dress, a silhouette against the endless dark ocean. She looked serene, untouchable. A perfect illusion. but inside a quiet scream was building a desperate yearning for something real, something more than this beautiful hollow life. She was lonely in a room full of people, a prisoner in her own home. She just didn't know that the walls of her prison were about to be spectacularly, cruelly demolished. The evening wore on, a relentless performance of social graces. Clara had managed to corner Jean-Pierre Dubois, the wizened director of the city's art museum. She'd deployed the full force of her charm, speaking passionately about the importance of public art, her knowledge of the Impressionists, her master's thesis topic, lending her an air of authority that temporarily eclipsed her status as just Liam Sterling's wife. She thought she had made headway. She thought she had done her duty. As the jazz trio took a break, a hush fell over the crowd. Liam had moved to the small raised platform near the grand piano, a champagne flute in one hand, a microphone in the other. A warm, expectant spotlight found him. This was a familiar part of the script. Liam's speech was the highlight of the gala the moment he would announce the staggering sum raised and pledge even more of his own fortune, cementing his godlike status in the city's philanthropic circles. Clara stood near the edge of the crowd, a polite smile fixed on her face. She felt a sense of relief. The night was almost over. Soon the guests would depart, the mask would come off, and she could retreat into the quiet solitude of her wing of the mansion. "Thank you all for coming," Liam began, his voice resonating with practiced warmth. "Your generosity tonight has been, as always, overwhelming. Together we've raised an astonishing $12 million for children's literacy programs across the state." A wave of enthusiastic applause rippled through the room. Liam let it wash over him, a small satisfied smile playing on his lips. He looked out at the sea of adoring faces, his gaze sweeping over them before finally deliberately landing on Clara. His eyes were different. The practiced warmth was gone, replaced by an arctic chill that made the blood freeze in her veins. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Generosity is a funny thing. He continued, his tone shifting, becoming more intimate, more confessional. The crowd leaned in, sensing a change in the emotional weather. "We give our money, our time, our hearts. We invest in things we believe will bring us returns. A better community, a brighter future, a lasting legacy." He took a slow sip of his champagne, his eyes still locked on hers. She felt 100 pairs of eyes follow his gaze, turning to her. She was pinned by the weight of their collective stare. Her smile began to feel like a cracking facade. "I have always been a man who believes in cutting my losses," Liam said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "When an investment fails to yield its expected returns, when it becomes a liability, a smart businessman divests. He moves on to more profitable ventures. He doesn't throw good money after bad." A confused murmur rippled through the guests. This was not the usual self-congratulatory speech. This was something else entirely. Clara's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She could feel the color draining from her face. "Tonight, as I stand here on the cusp of a new chapter for my foundation, I have decided to apply that same principle to my personal life." He paused, letting the silence stretch, wringing every drop of drama from the moment. Then he raised his glass. But he wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. He was looking directly at Clara, a cruel, triumphant smirk twisting his handsome features. "So I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice ringing with a terrifying clarity that cut through the silence. "To a new beginning, and to the end of my marriage. Clara and I will be divorcing." The words hit the room like a physical blow. There was a collective gasp, a shocked, disbelieving intake of breath. The air crackled with scandal. Jean-Pierre Dubois' jaw was slack. Jessica Vance's perfectly arched eyebrows shot up to her hairline. Every single guest was staring, their faces a mixture of horror, pity, and a raw, undisguised hunger for the drama unfolding before them. For Clara, the world dissolved into a meaningless roar. The clinking of glasses, the whispers, the faces, it all blurred into an impressionistic nightmare. The only thing in focus was Liam's face, his expression of cold, calculated victory. He had done this deliberately. Not in the sterile quiet of a lawyer's office, but here, in front of everyone. He hadn't just ended their marriage, he had stripped her of her dignity piece by painful piece in the most public way imaginable. He was making an example of her. He was branding her as a failed investment. Her hand flew to her belly, a desperate, instinctual gesture to protect the only thing that mattered. She could feel her baby, a tiny, innocent life, caught in the crossfire of this monstrous act. The room began to spin. The sapphire dress felt like a lead weight dragging her down. The air was thick, unbreathable. She saw a flicker of movement. Chloe, her one true friend in this sea of acquaintances, was pushing through the crowd towards her, her face a mask of fury. But Clara couldn't wait. She couldn't stand there for one more second and endure the pitying stares, the salacious whispers. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she turned. She didn't run. She walked. Head held high back, ramrod straight, she moved through the stunned, parting crowd. Each step was an agony, each beat of her heart, a hammer blow of humiliation. She walked past the Rothko, past the grand piano, past the jazz trio who stood frozen with their instruments. She walked out of the grand hall, away from the wreckage of her life, the sound of her husband's voice now trying to calm the chaos he had unleashed, fading behind her like a bad dream. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get away. The silence of the long white corridor was a deafening roar compared to the chaos she had left behind. Clara's stilettos clicked against the polished marble, the sound echoing the frantic, unsteady rhythm of her heart. She didn't look back. She couldn't. To look back would be to see the faces, the whispers, the ruin. She reached their private wing of the mansion, the space that was supposed to be a sanctuary. The door slid open with a soft, expensive hiss. Inside, everything was pristine, sterile, and cold. A massive California king bed, a walk-in closet the size of a small apartment filled with clothes she would never wear again, and a panoramic window showcasing a city that suddenly felt alien and hostile. For a moment she stood frozen in the center of the room, her body trembling uncontrollably. A single dry sob escaped her lips, a harsh, ugly sound in the crushing silence. Humiliation washed over her in hot, sickening waves. He had done it on purpose. He had planned it. The speech, the timing, the audience. It was all a calculated act of psychological warfare. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had immolated her entire existence. Her gaze fell upon a silver-framed photograph on her bedside table. It was from their honeymoon in Santorini, a carefully staged shot of them laughing, the Aegean Sea a brilliant blue behind them. Liam's arm was wrapped around her, his smile blinding. It was all a lie. A beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. With a sudden, violent surge of rage, she swept the photograph off the table. It crashed against the far wall, the glass shattering into 1,000 tiny pieces, just like her life. The rage gave way to a chilling clarity. She couldn't stay here. This wasn't her home anymore. It was a mausoleum of a dead marriage. Every object, every surface was tainted with his presence, with the memory of his cruelty. She had to leave, now. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for what to take. What do you take when you're leaving a life of infinite possessions? The jewelry, the designer bags, the art. It was all meaningless. It was all his. It was all part of the gilded cage. She went to the closet and ignored the rows of Chanel and Dior. At the very back, behind a rack of evening gowns, was a small, worn leather suitcase. It was the one she had brought with her when she first moved in 5 years ago. Inside were a few old sweaters, a pair of comfortable jeans, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, and a faded photograph of her parents. It was a relic from a life before Liam, a life that was her own. Her hands shook as she pulled it out. She stripped off the Valentino gown, letting it pool on the floor like a puddle of spilled ink. She changed into the jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, the familiar comfort of the fabric a small solace. She packed essentials, her mind working on a frantic, desperate autopilot. A toothbrush, her prenatal vitamins, the small amount of cash in her wallet, her phone, and her passport. She took one last look at the glittering prison around her. Then she walked out without a second glance. She bypassed the main elevators, taking a service stairwell at the back of the wing, her footsteps echoing in the cold concrete shaft. Her only thought was to escape the property before Liam or his security team could stop her. His control was absolute. He would likely cancel her credit cards, her car access, everything. She emerged into the cool night air near the staff parking lot. The party was still in full swing, the sound of it a distant, grotesque hum. She pulled her phone out, her fingers fumbling with the screen. She had no one to call. Her parents were on a cruise in the Mediterranean, a trip Liam had gifted them. Her old friends. She had let those connections wither under the suffocating shadow of her marriage. There was Chloe. But Chloe was still inside, likely trying to find her. Calling her would only draw attention. Then a name surfaced in her mind. A long shot. A desperate last-ditch idea born of sheer panic. Catherine Sterling, Liam's mother. They had a strained formal relationship. Catherine was old money, a woman of quiet, formidable dignity who lived in a sprawling, slightly faded estate in the Hudson Valley, a world away from Liam's sleek, modern empire. She had always been polite to Clara, but there was a distance, a reservation in her eyes. Catherine had never seemed to fully approve of her son's ostentatious lifestyle, or perhaps of the woman who had become a part of it. But Clara also remembered a moment, a brief conversation a year ago at Christmas. Liam had made a casually cruel remark about Clara's family, and she had seen a flicker of something in Catherine's eyes, a sharp, unmistakable disapproval directed at her own son. It was a fleeting moment, but it had stuck with her. It was a crazy, desperate gamble. What would she say? "Hello, Catherine, your son just publicly humiliated me and I'm pregnant and homeless. Can I come stay?" But where else could she go? She had a few $1,000s in cash. It wouldn't last long. She needed a safe harbor, a place to think, to breathe, to figure out what to do next. With a trembling finger, she opened the ride-sharing app on her phone. She typed in the address for the nearest private airfield. She knew Liam kept a small jet there for short-haul trips. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, his pilots would be loyal to a paycheck, not to him. No, that was a foolish idea. He would have them on his payroll. She changed the destination to the main airport, JFK. It was a start. She would fly to New York, and from there she would figure it out. She booked a ticket on the first red-eye flight, a commercial flight, something she hadn't done in 5 years. The car arrived minutes later, a nondescript sedan. As she slipped into the back seat, she glanced back at the mansion one last time. It was a glittering beacon of power and wealth on the cliffside, her prison. And as the car pulled away, melting into the darkness of the Pacific Coast Highway, Clara didn't feel sadness. She felt a terrifying, exhilarating rush of freedom. The flight was just beginning. The 6-hour flight to New York was a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. Clara sat huddled in a window seat in economy class, a baseball cap pulled low over her face, the unfamiliar proximity of strangers, a strange comfort after the cavernous isolation of her former life. She didn't sleep. Her mind replayed Liam's words, his smug, cruel face, over and over again. Each replay was a fresh stab of pain, but with each stab a layer of shock peeled away, revealing a hard, cold core of anger. She landed at JFK as the sun was casting a pale, watery light over the city. The raw, chaotic energy of New York was a jolt to her senses. For a moment, she felt completely, terrifyingly alone. A pregnant woman with a small suitcase, a few $1,000s, and the ruins of a life in her wake. The impulse to find an anonymous hotel and hide was overwhelming, but the image of Catherine Sterling's face, that flicker of disapproval towards her son, returned to her. It was the only sliver of hope she had. Taking a deep breath, she rented a car using her debit card, praying Liam hadn't thought to cancel it yet, and began the 2-hour drive north into the heart of the Hudson Valley. As she left the city behind, the landscape softened into rolling hills and lush greenery. The houses grew farther apart, replaced by grand old estates hidden behind stone walls and ancient trees. It was a different kind of wealth from the sharp-edged, ostentatious world she had left behind in California. This was old, quiet, and deeply entrenched. She found the address easily. A pair of imposing but slightly rusted wrought iron gates stood open at the end of a long gravel driveway. The sign read, Blackwood Manor. It was Catherine's family home, a name that carried a weight Liam's Sterling never could. The house came into view, and it took her breath away. It wasn't a sleek glass box. It was a magnificent rambling stone manor, covered in ivy and steeped in history. It was beautiful, but in a way that felt real, lived in, and slightly melancholic. It looked like a house that had seen generations of life, of joy and of sorrow. Her courage faltered. She sat in the rental car at the end of the driveway for a full 10 minutes, her hands gripping the steering wheel. What was she doing? Catherine could slam the door in her face. She could call Liam. She could tell her she had made her bed and now she had to lie in it. No, she told herself, her hand dropping to her belly. You're not just doing this for you. The thought of her child gave her the final push she needed. She put the car in drive and crunched slowly up the gravel path. She parked the car and walked to the massive oak front door. Before she could even knock, it swung open. Catherine Sterling stood in the doorway. She was a tall, slender woman in her late 60s, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She was wearing simple linen trousers and a cashmere sweater, a stark contrast to the designer labels she wore at Liam's events. Her face, etched with fine lines, was calm, her blue eyes sharp and intelligent. There was no shock on her face, no surprise, only a deep, weary sadness. I was wondering when you would arrive, Catherine said, her voice calm and steady. I saw the news alerts. The gossip sites are having a field day. It's utterly barbaric. Clara stared at her, speechless. She had expected shouting accusations, at the very least a barrage of questions. Not this quiet, solemn acceptance. Come in, child, Catherine said, gently stepping aside. You look exhausted. Clara stepped over the threshold and the door closed behind her, shutting out the world. The inside of the house was just as she had imagined. It was filled with antique furniture, worn oriental rugs, shelves overflowing with books, and the scent of old wood and beeswax. A fire crackled in a large stone hearth, and 2 golden retrievers lifted their heads from the rug, thumping their tails in a lazy welcome. The dam of composure Clara had so carefully constructed for the past 12 hours finally broke. A choked sob escaped her, and her legs felt weak. Catherine was there in an instant. Her arms, surprisingly strong, wrapped around Clara, holding her steady. It's all right, she murmured, her voice losing its formal edge, becoming something softer, something maternal. You're safe here. He can't touch you here. She led the weeping Clara to a comfortable armchair by the fire and disappeared for a moment, returning with a cup of steaming chamomile tea. Drink this, she commanded gently. There will be time for talk later. First, you need to rest. Clara drank the tea, the warmth seeping into her cold, trembling hands. She looked at her mother-in-law, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time. She saw not the distant, formal matriarch, but a woman whose eyes held a profound, deep-seated disappointment, not in Clara, but in her own child. Why, Clara whispered the question, raw and ragged. Why are you being so kind to me? Catherine sat down in the chair opposite her, her gaze unwavering. Because you are carrying my grandchild, she said, her voice firm. And because no woman deserves what my son did to you. What he did was not just cruel. It was vulgar. It was the act of a man I no longer recognize. She leaned forward, her expression hardening. I have been estranged from Liam in spirit, if not in fact, for many years. I watched him become a caricature of wealth, a man obsessed with power and image. I tried to warn him. I tried to guide him. But he is his father's son in all the ways that matter least. A log in the fireplace shifted and popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Liam may have his father's business acumen, Catherine continued, her voice laced with a bitterness that stunned Clara, but he also has his cruelty. And his secrets. I imagine you have many questions, and I promise you, Clara, I will help you find the answers. But more than that, I will help you fight. He has underestimated you, and he has most certainly underestimated me. In that moment, sitting in the warm, firelit living room of a woman she barely knew, Clara felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. She was not alone. She had found not just a sanctuary, but an ally, an unlikely, formidable, and powerful ally. The war was far from over, but for the first time she felt like she might just have a chance of winning. The first few days at Blackwood Manor were a cocoon of quiet recuperation. Catherine was a constant, unobtrusive presence. She made sure Clara ate, that she slept in a comfortable guest room with a view of the sprawling gardens, and that she was left alone with her thoughts when she needed to be. They spoke little of Liam. Instead, Catherine shared stories of the house of her family, of a world that valued legacy over currency and character over charisma. Clara felt herself slowly unfurling, the tight knot of terror and humiliation in her chest beginning to loosen. She took long walks through the gardens, the crisp autumn air a balm to her frayed nerves. She read books from Catherine's vast library, losing herself in worlds far from her own. For the first time in years, she felt the space to simply be. One crisp afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Catherine found her sitting on a stone bench overlooking the Hudson River. "You have your color back," Catherine observed, sitting beside her. "That's good to see." "I feel more human," Clara admitted. "Thank you, Catherine, for everything." "It's the least I can do," Catherine said, her gaze fixed on the river. "But peace and quiet will only get us so far. Liam will have made his move by now." As if on cue, Clara's phone, which had been blessedly silent, buzzed. It was an email from a law firm she didn't recognize, Harrison and Shaw. The subject line was chillingly simple, Sterling v. Sterling. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a formal notice. Liam had officially filed for divorce. Attached was a document outlining the terms of his proposed settlement. Her blood ran cold as she read it. He was offering her a one-time payment of $1 million. In exchange, she was to sign a comprehensive NDA, relinquish all claims to any of their shared assets, and this was the part that made her feel physically ill, agree to grant him sole legal and physical custody of their unborn child upon its birth. He cited her emotional instability, evidenced by her abrupt and dramatic departure from their home, as grounds for her being an unfit mother. The monster, Clara whispered, the phone slipping from her numb fingers. "He wants to take my baby." Catherine picked up the phone and read the email, her expression hardening into one of cold fury. "Harrison and Shaw," she said, her voice tight with contempt. "Of course. Richard Harrison is the most ruthless corporate lawyer in New York. He has no morals, only billable hours. This is not a divorce proceeding, Clara. This is a hostile takeover." She stood up, her posture radiating a sudden intense energy. "I knew he would do something like this. He's trying to scare you. He's trying to break you before the fight even begins." "What do I do?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. $1 million sounds like a lot, but compared to his wealth. And my baby. I can't. "You will do nothing," Catherine stated firmly. "You will not respond. You will not panic. You will let me handle this. We are not going to play defense. We are going to attack." She led Clara back to the house, to a grand wood-paneled study that smelled of leather and old paper. From a locked drawer in a massive mahogany desk, she retrieved a thick, leather-bound ledger. "Liam thinks his empire is impenetrable," Catherine said, opening the ledger on the desk. "He thinks because he built it, he understands all its weaknesses. He is wrong." She turned the ledger towards Clara. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting and columns of figures. "Liam's father, my late husband, was a brilliant but reckless man. When he died, he left a financial mess that was far more precarious than anyone knew. I spent 2 years with accountants and lawyers quietly cleaning it up. In the process, I learned to read the bones of a business. And I have been keeping my own private accounts of Liam's businesses ever since he took over. Clara looked at her stunned. You've been tracking his finances? A mother worries, Catherine said with a grim smile. Especially when her son worships at the altar of risk. Liam's company. Sterling Industries is a house of cards, Clara. It looks magnificent from the outside, but its foundations are built on a mountain of debt and dangerously over-leveraged assets. He's been using short-term loans to finance long-term projects, juggling payments, robbing Peter to pay Paul. The market has been good to him, so he's stayed afloat. But a downturn, a single major project failure, and the whole thing could collapse. She pointed to a specific entry in the ledger. Look here. The Azure Sky development in Dubai. He's sunk nearly $500 million of borrowed money into it. The project has been plagued by delays and whispers of corruption with local officials. It's his biggest gamble, and from what my sources tell me, it is on the verge of catastrophic failure. The pieces started to click into place in Clara's mind. Liam's increasing paranoia, his obsession with the museum wing donation, a desperate attempt to maintain his image of success, and the public brutal divorce. The prenup, Clara said suddenly. We have a prenuptial agreement. I barely read it at the time. I was in love, I didn't care. Let me guess, Catherine said. It entitles you to a significant settlement, something like $50 million in the event of a divorce, unless you are the one to be unfaithful, or are deemed to be at fault. Clara nodded, her eyes wide. Yes, but I haven't done anything. Exactly, Catherine replied. He couldn't find a reason to invoke the clause, so he created one. By humiliating you so publicly, he hoped you would react hysterically, irrationally, fleeing in the middle of the night, disappearing. He's painting you as unstable, the at-fault party. He's trying to get out of the divorce for pennies on the dollar because he doesn't have the $50 million to give you. He is financially hemorrhaging. The audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. It wasn't just about cruelty, it was about cold, hard cash. He was willing to destroy her to take their child to save himself from financial ruin. But what about the baby? Clara asked, her voice thick with horror. The baby is his trump card, Catherine said, her voice grim. His ace in the hole. If he has the sterling heir, his investors, his bankers, they will see continuity. They will see a future. The legacy is secured even if the balance sheets are bleeding red. He thinks he can bully you into giving up your child and in doing so save his empire. Catherine closed the ledger with a decisive thud. But we have something he doesn't know we have. We have the truth. And we have this. She tapped the leather-bound book. This is our weapon. Richard Harrison can send all the threatening letters he wants. But he is about to come up against a lawyer of a very different caliber. She picked up the phone on her desk and dialed a number from memory. Arthur. It's Catherine Blackwood. She said, her voice all business. I have a situation here, a family matter. Yes, it involves my son. I need you to come to the manor. And Arthur, bring your sharpest teeth. She hung up the phone and looked at Clara, her eyes gleaming with a warrior's light. Arthur Prescott is my family's lawyer. His family has represented my family for a century. He is semi-retired, but he despises corporate sharks like Harrison, and he loves a good fight. The game has changed, Clara. Liam wanted a war. Now he's going to get one. Arthur Prescott arrived the next morning. He was a man in his 70s with a shock of white hair, a tweed jacket, and eyes that twinkled with a shrewd intelligence that belied his grandfatherly appearance. He greeted Catherine with a warm hug, and Clara with a kind, reassuring smile. He listened intently for over 2 hours in the study as Catherine laid out the situation, presenting her ledger as evidence, while Clara recounted the story of the party and the threatening email from Liam's lawyer. When they were finished, Arthur sat back, steepling his fingers. Despicable, he murmured, and utterly desperate. This isn't a strategy, it's a Hail Mary pass. Liam is betting everything on your fear, Clara. He turned to her. Our first step is to go on the offensive. We will file a countersuit. We will not only reject his insulting offer, but we will sue for the full amount stipulated in the prenuptial agreement. Furthermore, we will petition for sole custody for you, citing his act of extreme public cruelty as evidence of a character unfit to be a primary caregiver. We will paint him not as a powerful businessman, but as a reckless, emotionally abusive man who would publicly humiliate his pregnant wife to solve a cash flow problem. For the first time, Clara felt a surge of power. Can we win? Winning is a matter of leverage, Arthur said, a glint in his eye. And thanks to Catherine's meticulous record-keeping, he nodded towards the ledger. We have a great deal of it. Richard Harrison thinks this is a simple, brutal divorce. He has no idea we're about to put Sterling Industries under a microscope. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. Arthur's team filed the countersuit, and the response from Liam's camp was swift and furious. The letters from Harrison and Shaw became more frequent, more threatening. They accused Clara of being a gold digger, of having an affair, a baseless, easily disproven lie, of plotting to extort money from Liam. They demanded psychiatric evaluations. They tried to subpoena her long-distance phone records with her parents. Each letter was a fresh assault, but with Catherine and Arthur at her side, Clara found a new strength. She was no longer a frightened victim. She was a key player in a high-stakes battle for her future and her child's. She spent hours with Arthur, going over her life with Liam, detailing every instance of his control, his emotional manipulation, his casual cruelty. It was painful, but also empowering. She was finally giving voice to the silent screams she had suppressed for years. Meanwhile, Liam was not idle. The story of the divorce gala had become a fixture in the gossip columns. Liam, a master of public relations, began to spin a new narrative. He gave a carefully curated interview to a major financial newspaper, painting himself as a heartbroken husband, betrayed by a volatile, materialistic wife. He spoke of his profound desire to protect his unborn child from a damaging environment. His vast PR machine worked overtime to scrub the reality of what he'd done and replace it with a more palatable fiction. He also began to apply financial pressure. As predicted, Clara's debit card was declined. Her private accounts, which Liam had always funded, were frozen. The one-time payment of $1 million was dangled in front of her again and again by his lawyers, a tempting lifeline designed to make her give up. But Catherine was her fortress. Let him, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand when Clara told her about the frozen accounts. He is severing every tie that connects you to him. He is making you independent, and he's too foolish to see it. You are a resident of my home. You are my guest. You will want for nothing. One evening, a sleek black car came up the driveway. A man in a sharp suit delivered a large, beautifully wrapped box. It was from a high-end baby boutique in Manhattan. There was no note. Clara opened it to find an absurdly expensive layette cashmere onesies, tiny silver monogrammed booties, a blanket that probably cost more than her first car. It was a classic Liam move, a power play disguised as a gift. A reminder that he could provide for this child in a way she, now penniless, could not. It was meant to intimidate her, to make her feel inadequate. She looked at the box with disgust. The old Clara would have been confused, maybe even touched by the gesture. The new Clara saw it for what it was, a threat. She walked the box out to the large trash receptacles at the side of the manor and dropped it inside with a satisfying thud. The battle for public opinion raged, but the real war was happening behind the scenes. Arthur's legal team filed a motion for discovery, demanding full access to the financial records of Sterling Industries, specifically citing concerns about the company's solvency and its ability to meet its obligations, including Liam's potential divorce settlement. This was the move that changed the game. It was a direct strike at the heart of Liam's empire. Harrison and Shaw fought it furiously, claiming it was an irrelevant fishing expedition. But a judge, intrigued by the preliminary evidence Arthur presented, granted the motion. The storm was gathering. Liam had started a fire thinking he could control the burn. Now the wind had changed direction and the flames were racing back towards his own house of cards. And in the quiet sanctuary of Blackwood Manor, Clara, her belly growing with the new life inside her, prepared for the final confrontation. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the legacy of truth and dignity that Catherine had shown her, and for the future of the child who deserved to be born into a world free of its father's toxic influence. The court-ordered discovery was a nuclear bomb dropped on Liam Sterling's empire. As Arthur's forensic accountants began to comb through the tangled web of Sterling Industries, the picture Catherine had painted became terrifyingly clear. It was worse than she had even suspected. The Dubai project was a black hole of debt, and Liam had been illegally moving funds from other corporate entities, and even from the Sterling Foundation's accounts, to keep it from collapsing before he could secure a new round of financing. The news sent shockwaves through the financial community. The carefully constructed image of Liam Sterling, the infallible Midas-touch billionaire, began to crack. His lenders grew nervous. His board of directors, once little more than a rubber stamp for his ambitions, started asking pointed questions. The PR machine could no longer contain the story. The narrative shifted from a messy celebrity divorce to a potential corporate implosion. Liam was cornered, and like a cornered animal, he became even more dangerous. He demanded a face-to-face meeting. Not with the lawyers, but with Clara. Alone. His lawyers framed it as a final good-faith attempt to resolve things amicably for the sake of the child. Arthur was vehemently opposed. "It's a trap, Clara. He's going to try to manipulate you, threaten you, anything to get you to call off the dogs." Catherine, however, had a different perspective. "She should go," she said, her eyes meeting Clara's. "But she will not go alone, and she will not go unprepared." Catherine looked at Clara, who was now nearly 7 months pregnant, her strength and resolve a palpable aura around her. "He still sees the woman you were, the quiet, accommodating girl he thought he could break. He has no idea who you've become. Let him see you. Let him see that his power over you is gone. Sometimes the only way to slay a dragon is to walk into its lair." The meeting was set for a neutral location, a private suite at the Carlyle Hotel in Manhattan. Arthur insisted on one condition: he would wait in the adjoining suite, and the entire meeting would be recorded. Liam's lawyers, desperate for any chance to stop the financial bleeding, reluctantly agreed. When Clara walked into the suite, Liam was already there, pacing in front of the window overlooking Central Park. He looked haggard. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, wired energy. There were dark circles under his eyes. He turned as she entered, and for a moment his mask slipped. He saw her, truly saw her. The swell of her belly prominent under a simple but elegant dress. Her face calm and composed. Her eyes clear and steady. There was no fear there. He had expected tears pleading. He was met with a serene strength that clearly unnerved him. "Clara," he said, his voice attempting its old familiar charm. "You look, well, I am," she replied, her voice even. She sat in an armchair, not waiting for him to invite her to do so. "Why did you want to see me, Liam?" He abandoned the pretense of pleasantries. "You have to stop this," he said, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "You and my mother and that fossil of a lawyer, you're destroying my company. You're destroying me." "You did this, Liam," she said, her voice remaining calm, cutting through his panic. "You did this when you decided to announce our divorce like it was a corporate restructuring. You did this when you tried to take my child away from me to cover your financial mistakes." "I did it to protect the legacy," he shot back, his voice rising. "Our child's legacy. Everything I have built is for him. You don't understand the pressure, the stakes." "I understand perfectly," Clara said, leaning forward slightly. "I understand that you were about to lose everything, so you tried to get rid of me for a fraction of what our prenup dictated. I understand that you value your image more than your wife and your bottom line more than your son. That's not legacy, Liam. That's a pathology." He stared at her, flabbergasted. This was not the Clara he knew. The Clara he knew would have crumbled under his anger. He tried a different tack, his voice softening, becoming cloying. "Bella, please. Think of the baby. He doesn't deserve to be born into this chaos, this public spectacle. Call it off. We can go back. Not to how it was, but to something new. We can co-parent. I'll give you a generous settlement. Anything. Just make it stop." Clara listened, and she felt nothing but a profound hollow pity for the man in front of her. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about money. "There is only one way this stops, Liam," she said, standing up. It was her turn to be in the position of power. "You will give me the full $50 million as stipulated in the agreement. It will be placed in a trust managed by Arthur and myself for our son. You will agree to my having sole physical custody. You will be allowed supervised visitation conditional upon your continued good behavior and a court-mandated course of anger management therapy." She paused, letting the weight of her terms sink in. "You will also issue a public apology, not to the media but to me, a real one. And finally, you will turn over all of Catherine's ledgers and our findings to the SEC. You will face the consequences of your own actions." He looked at her as if she had sprouted a second head. "You're insane," he breathed. "That would be suicide. They'll launch a full investigation. I could go to prison." That Clara said, her voice as cold and hard as diamond, is not my problem. You built this house of cards, Liam. You can either let it fall on its own, or you can have a hand in how it's dismantled. Those are my terms. You have 24 hours to have your lawyer call mine." She turned and walked towards the door, her step steady and sure. "Clara, wait," he called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "Don't do this. I'm still your husband. I'm the father of your child." She stopped at the door and looked back at him, at the broken, desperate man standing in the wreckage of his own making. "No, Liam," she said quietly. "You were the man I married. You are the biological father of my son. But his father, that is a title you will have to earn. And you have a very, very long way to go." She walked out the door, leaving him alone in the silent, opulent suite, the full weight of his reckoning finally crashing down upon him. The storm had broken. Faced with utter ruin, Liam folded. 23 hours later, a humbled Richard Harrison called Arthur Prescott and agreed to all of Clara's terms. The public apology arrived by courier, a handwritten letter that was stilted and self-serving but met the technical requirement. The funds were transferred into the trust. The custody agreement was signed, and Arthur, true to their word, anonymously forwarded the damning evidence of Liam's financial crimes to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The downfall of Liam Sterling was swift and spectacular. The SEC investigation led to federal charges. The Dubai project collapsed, taking his company down with it. He was forced to sell the cliffside mansion, the private jet, the art collection, all of it consumed by debts and legal fees. The man who had stood on a stage and wielded his power like a weapon was reduced to a tabloid caricature, a modern-day Icarus who had flown too close to the sun. In the end, he was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security federal prison. 2 months after the meeting at the Carlisle, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Nicholas after her own father, but gave him the middle name Blackwood in honor of the woman who had become her anchor and her champion. She did not return to California. Blackwood Manor had become her home. The quiet rhythm of life there, punctuated by the gurgles and cries of her newborn son, was a healing balm. The vast, lonely mansion had been filled with a new kind of life. Her relationship with Catherine had blossomed into a deep and genuine bond. They were no longer just allies. They were family. Catherine, who had been a distant grandmother-in-waiting, was a doting, hands-on grandmother. She would spend hours rocking Nicholas by the fire, telling him stories of the family he was born into. Not the Sterling legacy of smoke and mirrors, but the Blackwood legacy of resilience, integrity, and quiet strength. Clara, for her part, found a new purpose. She was no longer defined by her husband or his wealth. She was a mother. She was the manager of her son's considerable trust, and she was rediscovering the woman she had been before Liam. With Catherine's encouragement, she enrolled in an online program at Columbia University to finish her PhD in art history. She began consulting for smaller museums and galleries, her passion for art rekindled. One sunny afternoon in early summer, she was sitting on the lawn with Catherine watching 9-month-old Nicholas crawl determinedly through the grass. A letter had arrived that morning from a P.O. box in Pennsylvania. It was from Liam. She hadn't opened it. "Are you going to read it?" Catherine asked gently. Clara looked at the letter, then at her son, his face alight with the simple joy of discovering a dandelion. She thought of the man in the prison cell, the man who had tried to use this beautiful child as a pawn in his desperate game. She felt a pang not of anger anymore, but of a distant, sad pity. "No," she said, tearing the letter in half and then in half again. "His story is over. Ours is just beginning." She had walked through fire and emerged not scorched but forged. The gilded cage had been destroyed, and in its place she had built a life, a real messy, beautiful, and authentic life. She had lost a millionaire husband, a hollow crown, and a life of luxurious emptiness. And in its place she had found something infinitely more valuable, a loving family, a true home, and most importantly, herself. The future was an unwritten page, and for the first time in a very long time, she was holding the pen. Clara's journey from a humiliated wife in a sapphire gown to a powerful, independent mother is a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit. She didn't just survive the wreckage of her marriage, she rose from the ashes stronger, wiser, and in control of her own destiny. Her story proves that true power isn't found in billion-dollar bank accounts or public acclaim, but in resilience, integrity, and the unbreakable bonds of family we choose for ourselves. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments we have the power to rewrite our own narrative and build a new, more authentic beginning.